Hello, residents. I'm here to read to you again. I hope that y'all can hear and understand what I'm saying. It's a real good story. It's Love Comes Softly again, and this is part 4. And the last time that we read, Marty is learning how to fix meals and take care of a baby and things like that. Remember, they had a marriage of convenience. She's taking care of his child, and he's taking care of her and giving her a place to stay. But the last time he came in for supper, he was served lukewarm, mushy potatoes and slightly burned slices of ham, along with a few slices of bread that remained. And he said no mention, and the only thing that he said is, "That's right, good coffee." So he's not a complaining man. All right, here we go with chapter 7, A Welcome Visitor. Friday was clear and bright again, though the air did not regain the warmth of the first part of the week. Marty had made no comment on the muddy chinking, but as they had eaten their supper the night before, one small chunk in the corner had suddenly given way and lost its footing between the logs, falling to the floor, leaving a bit of a smear behind it. Remember, she had cleaned the chinking in between the different logs, and she put too much water. Clark had looked up in surprise, but then had gone on eating. Marty prayed, or would have prayed had she known how, that the rest of it would stay where it dad burned belonged. It did, and she thankfully cleared the table and washed the dishes. The light was needed now, as the days were short, and the men worked in the fields as late as they could before turning to chores. Marty was glad when darkness fell that night. The lamplight cast shadows obscuring the grayish chinking. As she washed Missy for bed, she thought that she heard another small piece give way, but she refused to admit it, raising her voice to talk to Missy and try to cover the dismaying sound. Well, that had been last night, and as Marty faced this new day, she wondered what dreadful things it held for her. One thing she knew. The bread crock was empty, and she had no idea at all of how to go about refilling it. She supposed that Clark knew how to bake bread, but she'd die before she'd ask him. And what about the chinking? Had the miserable stuff finally dried to white and become what it was supposed to be? She dreaded the thought of going to look, but lying there wasn't going to solve any problems. She struggled up from her bed. Her muscles still ached from her strenuous efforts the day before. She'd feel it for a few days, she was sure. Besides, she hadn't slept well. Her thoughts had again been on Clem and how much she missed him. Now she dressed without caring, ran a comb through her hair, and went to the kitchen. The first thing that she noticed was the chinking. Here and there, all around the wall, small pieces had given way and lay crumbled on the floor. Marty felt like crying, but little good that would do. She'd have to face Clark with it, confess what she had done, and take his rebuke for it. She stuffed a couple more sticks of wood on the fire and put on the coffee. Suddenly she remembered just how many pots of coffee she'd have to make in her future. It seemed at the moment that they stretched out into infinity. She found a kettle and put on some water to boil. This morning they'd have porridge for breakfast. But porridge and what? What did you have with porridge if you had no biscuits, no muffins, no bread, no nothing? Marty fretted and, pulling the pot off angrily, went to work again making pancakes. Missy awakened and Marty went in to pick her up. The child smiled and Marty found that she returned it. "Morning, Missy. Come to Mama," she said, trying the words with effort to see how they'd sound. She didn't really like them, she decided, and wished that she hadn't even used them. Missy came gladly and chattered as she was being dressed. Marty could understand more of the chatter now. She was saying something about Pa, and the cows that went moo, and the chickens that went cluck, and pigs. Marty couldn't catch the funny sound that represented the pigs, but she smiled at the child as she carried her to her chair. Clark came in to a now familiar breakfast and greeted his daughter, who squealed a happy greeting in return. After the reading of the word, they bowed their heads for Clark's prayer. He thanked his father for the night's rest and the promise of a fair day for the laying in of the rest of Jed's harvest. Marty was surprised at the next part of the prayer. Father, be with the one who works so hard to be a proper mama for Missy and a proper keeper of this home. The prayer went on, but Marty missed it. Everything that she had done thus far had been a flop. No wonder Clark felt that it would take help from the Almighty himself to set things in order again. She didn't know if she should feel pleased or angry at such a prayer, so she forcefully shoved aside the whole thing just in time for the Amen. Amen, echoed Missy, and breakfast began. At first, they ate silently, Clark and Missy exchanging some comments, and Clark scolding Missy. Don't you be a throwing your pancake on the floor. That's a naughty girl, and it makes more work for your mama. Marty caught a few other references to your mama as well, and realized that Clark had been using the words often in the past 2 days. She knew that he was making a conscious effort at educating the little girl to regard her as Mama. She supposed she'd have to get used to it. After all, that was what she was here for. Certainly not to entertain the serious-looking young man across from the table from her. Another piece of chinking clattered down, and Marty took a deep breath and burst forth. I'm afeard I made a dreadful mistake yesterday. I took on to clean the kitchen. I'd seen me it was all fresh and clean looking and smelling, Clark cut in. Now, why'd he have to do that, she stormed. She took another gulp of air and went on. But I didn't know what scrubwood would be a-doing to the chinkin. I didn't know that it would all soak up like that and then not dry right again. Clark said nothing, so she tried again. Well, it's a falling apart like. Look at it. It's crumbling up and falling out. Yeah, said Clark, not even lifting his eyes. Well, it not be staying in place, Marty floundered. Whatever can we do? She was almost angry by now. His calmness unnerved her. He looked up then and answered slowly. Well, when I go to town on Saturday, I'll pick me up some more chinkin. It's a special kind like, made to look whiter and cleaner, but no good at all for holding out the weather. The outside chinkin has to do that job. There'll still be time to redo it 'fore winter sets in. Water don't hurt the outer layer none, so it's holding firm like. Don't you worry yourself none about it. I'm sure that the bats won't be a-flying through the cracks afore I get to 'em. He almost smiled, and she could have gleefully kicked him. He rose to go. I reckon you've been pushing yourself pretty hard, though, and it might be well if you'd not try to lick the whole place in a week like. There's more days ahead, and you'd be looking kind of tired, he hesitated. If you should decide to do more cleaning, just brush down the walls with a dry brush, okay? He kissed Missy goodbye and, telling her to be a good girl for her mama, went out the door for what he said might be the last day of helping Jed Larson with his crop. She supposed he'd be around more then. She dreaded the thought, but it was bound to come sooner or later. She put water on to heat so that she could wash up the rag rugs before winter set in, and then found a soft brush to dust the sitting room walls. It didn't take nearly as long to brush them as it had to scrub the kitchen, and it did take care of the cobwebs and dust. She was surprised to be done so quickly, and did the windows and floor as well. The wash curtains were still fluttering in the fall breeze and the rugs drying in the sun when she heard the dog announce a team approaching. Looking out of the window, she recognized Mrs. Graham, and her heart gave a glad beat as she went out to welcome her. They exchanged greetings, and Ma put her team in the shade and gave them some hay to make them more content to wait. Then she followed Marty to the house. The dog lay to one side of the path now, chewing hard on a small bone-like object. Marty saw with horror that it was one of her biscuits. The dad-blamed dog had dug it up. With a flush to her cheek, she hurried Mrs. Graham by, hoping that the older woman wouldn't fail to recognize the lump for what it really was. As they entered the kitchen, Marty was overcome with shyness to a degree that she had never faced before. She had never welcomed another woman into her kitchen. She knew not what to do nor what to say, and she certainly had nothing at all to offer this visitor. Ma Graham kept her eyes discreetly from the crumbled clinking and remarked instead about the well-scrubbed floor. Marty bustled about self-consciously, stuffing wood in the stove and putting on the coffee. Ma talked easily of weather and Missy and the good harvest. Still, Marty felt ill at ease. She was thankful when the coffee had boiled and she was able to pour them each a cup. She placed Missy in her chair with a glass of milk and put on the cream and sweetening for Ma in case she used it. With a heavy heart, she realized that she didn't have a thing to serve with the coffee, not so much as a crust of bread. Well, the coffee was all that she had, so the coffee would have to do. "I see you've been as busy as a bee fall cleaning," Ma observed. "Yeah," responded Marty. She wanted it done before winter shut her in. Nice to have things all cleaned up for the long days and nights ahead when a body can't be out much. There's quilting and knitting days. Yep, that's how she felt. "Do you have plenty of rugs for comfort?" She was sure that they did. "What about quilts? You been needing any of those?" No, she didn't think so. They slowly sipped their coffee. Then Ma's warm brown eyes turned upon her. "How are things going, Marty?" It wasn't the words, it was the look that did it. The look to Ma's eyes said that she truly cared for how things were going, and Marty's firm resolve to hold up bravely went crumbling just like the chinking. Words tumbled over words as she poured out to Ma all about the pancakes, Missy's stubborn outburst, the bread crock being empty, the horrid biscuits, Missy's disappearance, the chinking, the terrible supper that she had served the night before, and finally her deep longing for the man whom she had lost so recently. Ma sat silently, her eyes filling with tears. Then suddenly she rose, and Marty was fearful that she had offended the older woman by her outburst. But Ma felt no such thing. She was a woman of action, and truly she could see that action was needed here. "Come, my dear," she said gently. "You're going to have you a lesson in bread making. Then I'll sit me down and write you out every recipe that I can think of. It's a shame what you've been going through the past few days, being as young as you are and still sorrowing and all. And if I don't miss my guess," her kind eyes going over Marty, "you be in the family way too, ain't you, child?" Marty nodded silently, swallowing her tears, and Ma took over working and talking, and finally managing to make Marty feel more worthwhile than she had felt since she had lost her Clem. After a busy day, Ma departed. She left behind her a reef of recipes with full instructions, fresh baked bread that filled the kitchen with its aroma, a basket full of her own goodies, and a much more self-confident Marty with supper well under control. Marty breathed a short prayer that if there truly was a God up there somewhere, he'd see fit to send a special blessing upon this wonderful woman whom she had so quickly learned to love. Saturday dawned clear and cooler, and breakfast of porridge and corn muffins was hurried so that Clark might get an early start to town. Marty presented him with the list that Ma Graham had helped her with the day before. "Mind ya," said Ma, "in the winter months it be sometimes 3 or 4 weeks between the trips we be a-taking to town because of winter storms, and you never know ahead which Saturdays you be a-missing, so you always have to be stocked up like." So the list had become a lengthy one, and Marty inwardly felt concern, but Clark didn't seem surprised when she handed it to him, and he read quickly through it to be sure that he had no questions concerning it. He kissed Missy goodbye, promising her a surprise when he returned, and was gone. Marty sighed in relief to again have a day without him about, and turned her thoughts to planning what she would do with it. Clark had warned her to take things a bit easier, and Ma Graham had said that she feared that she was overdoing for a woman in her state. But Marty knew that she must have something demanding to fill her hours, or her sense of loss would overwhelm her. So she looked around about to see what to tackle on this day. She'd finish her cleaning, she decided. First, she'd put water on to heat so that she could wash the bedding. Then she'd do the window, walls, and floor in the bedroom, and if time still allowed, she'd do the shed. She did not even consider cleaning the lean-to. That was Clark's private quarters, she felt, and she would not trespass. All day she worked hard, forcing her mind to concentrate on what she was doing. A dull fear raised its head occasionally. If she finished all the hard cleaning today, what would she do tomorrow? And tomorrow? And tomorrow? Marty pushed it aside. The tomorrows would have to care for themselves. She couldn't handle that right now. She was sure that if she let her mind fix on that, she'd break under the weight of it. She finished her final task of the day just in time to begin her supper preparations. Clark had said that he should be home for the usual chore time. She thumbed through the recipes that Ma had left. She'd fix biscuits and a vegetable stew, she decided, using some of the meat broth that Ma had brought to flavor the stew. She went to work, discovering that she had forgotten the fire again. "Dadburn it, will I never learn?" she fretted as she set in work to rebuild it. The vegetables were simming when she heard the team. Clark unhitched the wagon near the house to make it easier for the unloading of the supplies and went on down to the barn with the horses. Marty continued her supper preparation. This time, thanks to Ma Graham, the biscuits looked far more promising. She noticed that Clark looked weary when he came in from his chores. He gave Missy a hug before he sat down at the table, but Marty thought that his shoulders seemed to sag a bit. Was shopping really that hard on a man, or had she made the list too long and spent all of his money? As she sat at supper, Marty fretted over the problems, but there didn't seem to be an answer. So she concentrated on cooling Missy's stew. "Afraid the toting in of all the supplies will sort of mess up your well-ordered house for the moment," Clark's voice cut in on her thoughts. "That's okay," Marty responded. We'll get them in their proper place soon enough." "A lot of the stock supplies will go up in the loft over the kitchen," Clark went on. "You reach it by a ladder on the outside of the house." Marty's eyes widened in surprise. I didn't know there'd be a loft up there." "It's nigh empty right now, so there wasn't much use to you a-knowing. We stock it up in the fall, so we won't run out of such things as flour and salt come the winter storms. I'll carry the stock supplies direct up, so I won't have to clutter your house with them. The smaller things, though, I'll have to bring in here, so you can put 'em all away in the place where you want 'em. Do you be a-wanting 'em in the kitchen or in the shed?" Marty knew that it would be handier in the kitchen, yet if they were in the shed, it wouldn't make such a clutter until she got them put away. She opted for the shed, and they hurried through their supper in order to get at the task. After they had finished eating, Clark pulled from his pocket at a small bag of sweets and offered one to Missy. Then he gave the sack to Marty, telling her to help herself and then to tuck it up in the cupboard for future enjoyment. Missy smacked and sucked at the special treat, declaring it "num" and Pa's "yummy." As Marty washed the dishes, Clark brought the supplies into the shed so that she would have things there to work on as soon as she was free to do so. As she filled cans and crocks to put them away, Marty felt heady with the bounty of it all. She could hear Clark, as he labored under the heavy bags, moving again and again up the ladder to the kitchen loft. Marty found it necessary to finish the job by lamplight, but at least it was all done. The cupboards were bulging. Imagine if she and Clem could have stocked up like that. Wouldn't it have been like Christmas and picnic and birthdays all wrapped up in one? She sighed and wiped away an unbidden tear. Marty was tucking Missy in for the night, wondering if Clark was going to hear her prayers, as he usually did, when she heard him in the kitchen. He seemed to be struggling with a rather heavy load, and Marty's curiosity led her back to investigate. She arrived to find Clark, hammer in hand, removing a crate from some large object. She stood watching silently from the door while Clark's tool unmasked the crate's contents. Her breath caught in her throat, for there was shining metal and polished wood stood the most wondrous sewing machine that she had ever seen. Clark didn't look at her, but began speaking. His voice sounded as weary as his shoulders had looked, but he seemed to feel that a brief explanation was in order. "I ordered it some months back as a surprise for my Ellen. She liked to sew, and she was always making something fancy like. It was to be for her birthday. She would have been 21 tomorrow." Clark looked up then. "I'd be proud if you consider it yours now. I'm sure you can make use of it. I'll move it into your room under the window, if it pleases you." Marty held back a sob. He was giving her this beautiful machine. She was speechless. She'd always dreamed of having a machine of her own, but never had she dared to hope for one so grand. She didn't know what to say, yet she felt that she must say something. "Thank you," she mumbled. "Thank you. That'll be fine, just fine." Only then did she realize that the big man before her was fighting for control. His lips trembled, and as he turned away, she was sure that she saw tears in his eyes. Marty brushed by and went out into the coolness of the night. She had to think, to sort things out. He had ordered the machine for his Ellen, and he was weeping. He must be suffering too. She had noted the weary sag of his shoulders, the quivering lips, the tear-filled eyes. Somehow, she'd never thought of him as hurting, of being capable of understanding how she felt. Hot tears washed down Marty's cheeks. "Oh, Clem," her heart cried, "why do such things, such cruel things happen to people? Why? Why?" But Marty knew that there was no easy answer. This was the first time that Clark had mentioned his wife. Marty hadn't even known her name. Indeed, she had been so wrapped up in her own grief that she had not even wondered much about the woman who had been Clark's wife. Missy's mamma, and the keeper of this house. Now her mind was awake to it. The rose by the door, the bright cheery curtains, Missy's lovingly sewn garments that she was fast outgrowing, the many colorful rugs on the floor, everything, everywhere spoke of this woman. Marty felt suddenly like an intruder. What had she been like, this Ellen? Had she ever boiled the coffee over or made a flop of the biscuits? No, Marty was sure that she hadn't. But yet she had been so young, only 21 tomorrow, and she was already gone. True, Marty was even younger, 19 in fact, but still 21 seemed so young to die. And why did she die? Marty didn't know. There were so many things that she didn't know, but a few things were becoming clear to her. There had been a woman in this house who loved it and made it a home, who gave birth to a baby daughter that she cherished, who shared days and nights with her husband. Then he had lost her, and he hurt like she did over losing her Clem. She had been feeling that she was the only one in the world who bore that sorrow, but it wasn't so. It's a mean world, she thought as she turned her face upward. It's mean and wicked and cruel, she stormed. The stars blinked down at her from a clear sky. It's mean, she whispered, but it's beautiful. What was it that Ma had said? Time, she'd said, it's time that is the healer. Time and God. Marty supposed that she meant Clark's God. If and we can carry on one day at a time, the day will come when it gets easier and easier, and one day we surprise ourselves by even being able to laugh and love again. That's what Ma had said. It seemed so far away to Marty, but somehow she had the firm belief that Ma Graham should know. Marty turned back in the house. It was cool in the evening now, and she realized that she was shivering. When she entered the kitchen, she found that all traces of the machine and the crate had been removed. On the kitchen table was a large package wrapped with brown paper and tied with store twine. Clark indicated it. I'm not sure what might be in there, he said. I asked Mrs. McDonald at the store to make up whatever a woman be a needin' to pass the winter. She said that. I hope it passes. Marty gasped. Just what did he mean? She wasn't sure. Would you like me to be a moving it in on your bed so you can be a sorting through it? Without waiting for her answer, which may have taken half the night, she felt so tongue-tied, he carried it through to her room and placed it on her bed. He turned to leave. It's been a long day, he said wearily. I think I'll be ending it now. And he was gone. Marty's fingers fumbled as she lit the lamp. Then she hurried to try to untie the store string. Remembering the scissors in the sewing basket, she hastened to use them to speed up the process. She could hardly wait, but as the brown paper fell away, she was totally unprepared for what she found. There was material there for undergarments and nighties, and enough lengths for 3 dresses. One piece was warm and soft-looking in a pale blue-gray. Already her mind was picturing how it would look done up. It would be her company and visiting dress. It was beautiful. She dug further and found a pattern for a bonnet and 2 pieces of material, one lightweight and one heavier for the colder weather. There was lace for trimming and long warm stockings and even a pair of shoes, warm and high for the winter, and a shawl for the cool days and evenings. And on the bottom of all things, a long coat. She was sure that no one else in the whole West would have clothes to equal hers. Her eyes shone and her hands trembled. Then with a shocked appeal to her senses, she pulled herself upright. You little fool, she muttered. You can't be a-taking all this. Do you know that if'n you did, you'd be beholden to that man for years to come? Anger filled Marty. She wanted the things, the lovely things, but, she couldn't possibly accept them. What could she do? She would not humble herself to be beholden to this man. She would not be a beggar in his home. Tears scalded her cheeks. What could she do? What could she do? We're not fancy, but we try and be proper, haunted her. Could it be that he was embarrassed by her shabbiness? Yes, she decided, it could well be. Again, her chin came up. Okay, she determined, she'd take it, all of it. She would not be an embarrassment to any man. She would sew up the clothes in a way that would be the envy of every woman around. After all, she could sew. Clark need not feel shame because of her. But the knowledge of what she knew, or thought that she knew, drained much of the pleasure from the prospect of the new clothes. In his lean-to bedroom, Clark stretched weary, long legs under the blankets. It had been a hard day for him, fraught with difficult memories. It used to be such fun to bring home the winter supplies to Ellen. She made such a fuss over them. Why, if she'd been there today, she would have had Missy sharing in the game and half wild with excitement. Well, he certainly couldn't fault Marty. Only 5 days a widow. He couldn't expect her to be overly carried away about salt and flour at this point. She must hurt. She must really hurt. He wished he could be of some help to her, but how? His own pain was still too sharp. It took time, he knew, to get over a hurt like that, and he hadn't had enough time yet. The thought of wanting another woman had never entered his head since he'd lost Ellen. If it weren't for Missy, this one wouldn't be here now either. But Missy needed her, even if he didn't, and one could hardly take that out on the poor girl. At first he had resented her, he supposed, cleaning Ellen's cupboards, working at her stove, but no, that wasn't fair either. After all, she hadn't chosen to be here. He'd just have to try harder to be decent and to understand her hurt. He didn't want Missy in an atmosphere of gloom all the time. No, he'd have to try to shake the feeling, and in time, maybe she could too, so that the house would be a fit place for a little girl to grow up in. It'd be harder for her as she was all alone. She didn't have a Missy or a farm or anything really. He hoped that Mrs. McDonald had made the right choices. She really was going to need warmer things for the winter ahead. The thought that he was doing something special for her and getting her the things that she needed did not enter his thinking. He was simply providing what was needed for those under his roof, a thing that he had been taught was the responsibility of the man in the house. He had learned this when he was but a young and tramping around, trying to keep up to the long strides of his own pa. So we got several things to work through here, but it's coming down to quite a good story. All right, see you later.